Welcome back. I'm joined on the sofa now by Gordon Scruton. Good morning.
Morning.
And we're going to be talking today about one of my favourite subjects, which is writing better essays.
Is one of your favourite subjects?
It is, definitely. Now, last time we met on the sofa, I had just finished a rather large batch of marking, so I may have been a bit cross. But also, I was quite enthused about the things, enthused may be the wrong word, about the things that students were doing wrong, because I could see that there were some common errors, you must see this all of the time, some common errors that a lot of students were committing.
I mean, one of the things is that they are common errors. They are relatively easily fixed with a little bit of effort. And one of the things which I think I didn't realise when I was an undergraduate myself, I was very guilty of this, was that a lot of the feedback does transfer from assignment to assignment. I don't know about you, but when I was an undergraduate, I certainly kind of had that, right, I've got the feedback for this particular piece of work, there's the mark, am I happy with it? Yes, no, whatever. There's the feedback, fine, moving on to the next one. And that feedback I received for the previous assignment never entered my head again.
Yes, yeah.
I now realise that was wrong.
Yeah. I say to students at the end of every year, you know, when they've got that gap in the summer, it's a really good opportunity to actually look at all of the comments from the whole year, because they will start to see patterns emerging.
Well, I try to get them to do that during the year, to be honest, because it's just a matter of statistical probability, really. If the last 3 assignments you've had have said that you're doing this wrong, the next assignment you're putting together is probably going to have that error as well, unless you specifically focus on fixing it.
Yeah. And if people don't know how to fix it, they can.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the key things. Is like, first of all, you've got to recognise the issues that you've got. Identify whether that is an issue which you feel relatively confident fixing yourself. Yeah. Or if you don't feel particularly confident, don't suffer in silence.
Absolutely.
There's a whole load of support, and I guess I'd be one of the first, along with the marker. They can always get in touch with the marker, or their personal tutor if they wanted to, but in terms of academic skills, it would be me. Yeah.
And Gordon is just here for you, for our ICJS students. Yeah. So please, do get in touch with him. Now, you'd be disappointed if I didn't have a cardboard board at this moment. So here we are. This
is like a memory test now. I'm trying
this is the answer to everyone's problems on how to write better essays. Let's start with number 1. Use more and better evidence.
So, I guess I want to start with a small question. How, from what you remember from all the marking you were doing, how much were you saying this?
An awful lot. And I was saying it to the students who were scoring quite low marks. I was saying it to the students who were scoring quite high marks, because I think this one is relevant for everybody. You can, is this correct? You can never read too much, really. You can never research too much.
No,
you
just
can
run
never.
out of time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can never explore too much. No. And I think that the more evidence that you've got to support the arguments that you're making, the better your essay is going to be. Because if you're relying on 1 or 2 sources that aren't great, then you're going to have one particular angle. But if you can look at a range of sources that show the nuances of arguments, and that they're good quality, so the better bit as well.
Yes, we need to talk about the better. I think we need to talk about the hierarchy of evidence in terms of quality.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that your peer-reviewed articles in the journals, that's basically your gold standard.
Yeah.
Your textbooks provide a good sort of foundational knowledge, and if you wanted definitions of classicism or about the definitions of positivist criminology, that sort of thing, then you'd go to a textbook. You wouldn't go to a journal article. But those 2 are really where you get started, and then you know other information is available elsewhere, and is sometimes necessary. Sometimes you do need to go to the newspapers, but we go to the newspapers to see what the newspapers are saying about it, not to understand in general that subject, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Linda and I were talking about this morning, actually, when we were talking about referencing and not seeing the internet as just a lot of dodgy sites, but actually there's a lot of useful stuff out there, but just being a bit careful about what you use. She was talking this morning about House of Commons briefing reports, which are fabulous because they've got loads of really good information. So journal articles are fantastic. They're short, they're to the point, they are very specific, which is great. But, I have no problem with textbooks either because they're really useful, particularly for our level 4 students and sometimes level 5 students when they want to get an understanding of the basics of a topic.
I have seen marking recently for level 6 work where reliance on the textbooks has been kind of frowned on, or at least reliance on the textbooks is not necessarily... It's where an entire paragraph has been supported by Newbern, for example. Well, that's your key text in level 4. That you shouldn't still be relying on that when you're producing level 6 work, that sort of thing. The more evidence, that kind of speaks to making sure that you're backing up what you're saying with supporting citations, multiple citations where at all possible. If you can support the point you're making with 2 sources or 3 sources, it's better than supporting it with just 1.
Yeah, and students don't need to say, Brown has said this, White has said this.
Absolutely.
They can say the point,
yeah,
and then in brackets you can put the 3 references.
Yeah, you don't need to be repeating, you don't need a separate sentence for every single citation or source of evidence.
But it just shows that there is agreement out there from the academic community about the point that you're making, and that is great because that is enhancing your evidence base.
Well, that's beginning to touch on one of the things which certainly level 5, level 6 students need to start focusing on a bit more is the critical analysis.
Yes.
That shows critical analysis when you can show that it's not just one person agreeing, it's 2, 3, 4 different good quality sources all basically saying the same thing, then you can feel relatively confident when you use that evidence in your work.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you. Now, I have got a question from our Joe. Any tips for writing essays when you're struggling to get to grips with the subject matter?
Okay. Tips. So when you're struggling to get... I think I wouldn't start the writing before I was getting more to grips. Now, getting to grips with the subject matter sometimes can be... One thing I tend to find quite useful my prior experience with as a teacher is one of the best ways of learning something is having to teach it, having to explain it to somebody else, and that if you're struggling to understand what you're reading, one of the things which you can do is try and explain what you do understand to somebody else. And the act of explaining it to somebody else, having to explain it to somebody else so it makes sense, can sometimes just unlock a few doors. It can just get a few cogs moving, and you go back to the text and you read it again, and you're like, okay, now it makes a bit more sense. One of the other things, though, would be, if you only understand 70%, that's still 70% of the text that you're understanding.
I think it's also useful to go back to the learning materials on the module site to read through those really, really carefully. And if there's something you don't understand, for students to get in touch with their module coordinator, because that's what they're there for, is to help you with the subject matter. Another thing that I would always suggest to students is go back to the real basic reading. So go to those real textbooks, the Dictionary of Criminology, the real basic books that you start off with, have a read through those. So if you're reading things that are quite complex, take it back a few levels as well. But to get in touch with us would be the critical one.
I think one of the other things, this may be slightly off the writing of the better essays, this is maybe a bit earlier on, but the notes that you write, if you are reading quite passively, and I would define passively as being when you're just reading doing nothing, or even reading with a highlighter, or reading on the computer and finding interesting points and copying and pasting those into a notes document, that's exceptionally passive. You're not actually doing very much processing the information. The more active you can be, the more likely you are going to be to understand.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there.
If you can write down what you're reading and what you're understanding and what you're not understanding, have a conversation with yourself written down about how you're not understanding, what you think it might mean, and sometimes puzzling it out. A little bit of that sort of slightly targeted free writing, which I appreciate does sound a bit contradictory, but that can be really, really helpful. That's got me out of a few.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. Active reading rather than passive reading.
Yeah.
And also reading a couple of times as well, I think sometimes helps. If you don't understand something the first time, go back, read it again, read it out loud, read it really slowly. Brilliant. Thank you, Gordon. Number 2, a clear introduction and essay structure. I'm managing to squeeze 2 into each of these points.
Okay, so clear introduction, essay structure. Which one would you say comes first in your writing process? Which one has to come first in your
I
writing
always
process?
write this at the end because I don't know what's coming later.
No. How can you introduce something which you don't have yet?
Yeah. And what I find frustrating in students' work sometimes is that I read the introduction and think, oh great, they're going to talk about A, B, and C, and they don't. They don't talk about A.
I mean, I understand where it comes from. It comes from us all being at school and writing by hand, and by necessity, you had to write the introduction first because that was going to be at the top of the page. But now we've got computers. Yeah, I mean, I didn't go back to my master's dissertation. I didn't write that till about 4 days before it was due in. There was no point. The introduction basically has to have 2 main points. One is that you identify the broad issue that you're going to be discussing in more detail for the reader. You've got to bear in mind that markers like you have got X number of scripts, and certainly when you've got questions where choose A, B, and C, and use A, B, or use one of those to describe one of these crimes, for example, that means you've got potentially 12, 24 sort of combinations of essays that you might be reading. You've got to know when you get started what you're about to read as a marker. And I think a lot of students don't necessarily remember that. It's kind of keeping the audience in mind. So, first of all, the introduction has to have an overview of what's about to be covered.
Yes.
Very broad sort of overview. You're not talking in lots of detail. You're not talking about lots of citations here. And then the second part is the train announcement. It's the overview of the structure. It's we're going to be going here. We're going to be stopping here, 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 and here. So the reader has a very clear idea. And as you said, those need to then match up because you've read essays where the student's done a fantastic job of writing an introduction. Going to do this, going to do this, going to do this. And then they don't.
Yes.
And that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So clear introductions are absolutely vital. I also quite like in the introduction just a bit of a gentle reminder of what the topic's about.
Yes.
And why it's important. I was just talking to John about miscarriages of justice and investigations.
Yeah.
In that case, if you were writing something about changing investigations within policing, you might just start with there has been a controversial history of miscarriage of justice in the UK, which has led to the need for better policing investigations.
Making
this essay,
some sort of report that highlighted this recently. Yeah, that sort of
I really like that because it shows an awareness that students know what's going on.
Yeah.
But and then you go on to, like you say, the train announcement. This essay will blah blah blah, and then I think as a reader I feel nicely relaxed. Then I think, right, settle down. I can enjoy this. I know what the topic is, and I know what's going to be covered. Off we go, and you feel nicely relaxed.
Absolutely.
We're running out of time already, Gordon. This is amazing. This one now, as I've already said, we chatted with Linda earlier, so we talked a little bit about this, but referencing fully within the essay.
Yeah, referencing within the essay, you've got to remember that the citations that you are using apply only to the sentence that they are in. They do not, you can't put a citation at the end of the paragraph and make it apply to the entire paragraph. Just the conventions that we use in terms of in academic writing are that citation is specific to the sentence it is in.
And just keep putting them in. It doesn't matter if there are lots of references in a paragraph. If you're using a point from the evidence that you've gathered that you haven't come up with yourself, stick a reference at the end of the sentence.
I mean, you might get the potential damage of over-referencing is so much less than the potential damage of under-referencing.
Absolutely.
Under-referencing can fail assignment. It has failed. It does fail assignments. So yeah, I think that's a key thing. You just got to bear in mind any sort of information that you got from somewhere else. You just need to acknowledge where you got the information from. You did a bunch of work reading when you were putting an essay together. So give yourself, acknowledge that. Yeah.
Right, we've got a couple of minutes left for two.
Move on quickly.
Move from description to discussion.
Okay, what's the difference between description and discussion then? Description would be the facts, it would be the figures, it would be the information that you get from other sources. It's all the evidence that you're bringing in to build your argument. The discussion is then your argument. And a lot of students feel very uncomfortable because there's this whole, I'm not allowed to give my opinion. And that, I don't know, but I have huge issues with that because we do need to see their opinion. We need to see an informed opinion.
Informed opinion, yeah.
And if we don't see an informed opinion, there's no critical analysis. It's basically a glorified Wikipedia page. And it's not academic.
But I think there's a fear of this sometimes, isn't there?
Enormous.
That
Enormous.
people will think that they're not referencing properly.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've done the description, which is what does the literature tell us, what does the statistics tell us, the discussion is then, why does that matter?
Yeah.
What's important about that? And you can, as a student, you can discuss what's important about it because you're basing that discussion on the evidence. As long as you base all of that on the evidence, you're fine.
One of the things I would say is very, very quickly, we are running out of time, is that with the sentences that have descriptions, those tend to be the sentences that are going to have citations in them. When you've just written a sentence that has a citation that's drawn a point from a source, make yourself write in the next sentence an answer to the question, so what?
Yes, definitely.
So
why does that matter?
Yeah, exactly. Why does that matter?
And also, why are you telling me that?
Yes.
And that relates to our last point, which is about signposting.
Yeah.
Because you might produce some really good evidence in your essay as a student, but you need to tell your marker why you're producing that evidence and why it's important, and that relates to signposting, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. I mean, signposting, I know a lot of students feel uncomfortable with it because they feel it's condescending. They feel it's a little bit too going back to school. It's this essay will first discuss this. And yes, I mean, that can be oversimplistic, but if that's where you're at the moment with your signposting skills, use it.
Yes.
You will develop subtler, more nuanced ways of doing signposting as you go along, but if you just avoid it completely, you're never going to make progress.
Yeah,
in terms of
I think that's a really
better.
important point that you've made there, that it doesn't matter if it's basic at the start, but just do it because you will get better at it. And it's a bit like what we were talking about earlier with the introduction. It relaxes your reader because it tells them where we're going and it tells them where you've been. And it's the training announcement thing again, isn't it?
Yeah. It's mechanical, it is a bit structural, it's you're not writing poetry, you're not writing the next sort of bestseller Booker Prize piece here. You do have to kind of make your peace with the fact that signposting, it's not the most exciting sentence that you'll write that day, but it is exceptionally necessary.
And it tells people why what you've written is important and what's coming up next as well.
And so just signposting, the beginning, topic sentence, you're going to say what's going to be in that paragraph, the end of that paragraph, the end of that point, link it back to the question.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gordon. That was really useful, as
I think
ever.
we got through just about everything.
Just about everything. We might make a new board for next time. We might
do.
splash out a little bit, but thank you very much, as always.